basically, you can bring it back. You just have to pay tax at U.S. corporate rates. And our corporate rates are 35%. Charlie and I, a good bit of our life, operated with corporate rates of 52%, later at 48%. And the country grew well. American business prospered during that period. I don't shed any tears for American business in terms of the tax rate overall. I think there could be a much more equitable code in terms of the corporate tax. But I do not think that the 2% of GDP that's being raised from corporate taxes, which is far lower than was the percentage 30 or 40 years ago, I do not think that's an onerous number. And for people who are getting 1/4 or 0.5% on their CDs who retired, and with American business earning on tangible equity, which is the way to measure it, probably averaging close to 15%, I think equity holders are getting treated extraordinarily well compared to debt holders in this economy. Charlie?
Well, I agree with you, and I don't die over in the tax code either. I live in California, of course, where there's like a 13.5% tax on long-term capital gains, non-deductible for federal purposes. That's a ridiculous kind of a tax to have in California because it drives the rich people out. Hawaii and Florida have enough sense to know that rich people don't commit a lot of crimes. They don't burden the schools. They provide a whole lot of medical expenditures that are good for everybody else's income. I think California has a really stupid tax policy. But I don't think the U.S. policy is. I don't think the U.S. policy is bad at all.
And it's not deductible because of the alternative minimum tax?
Exactly.
Yeah. That really wasn't the case before, but
it's always
kind of slipped in.
They did it on purpose. No, they did it on purpose.
We're here, early stages of paranoia.
Yeah. But it's amazing. The idea of driving the rich people out. Florida is so much smarter than California on that subject. And it is really demented. Who in the hell doesn't want rich people coming in and spending in their state?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that as you come here to Nebraska for the meeting. Yeah. I would say that I really do think there's some chance this year, and not a tiny chance. I know both Ron Wyden and Orrin Hatch. They're patriotic. They're smart. They want to do the right thing. They've got different ideas about what the right thing is. There's no question about that. But they also know they can't get any place without cooperating. I think the real opportunity is if they work out of the public eye in working on something like this. And I wouldn't be surprised if they are. I think that's the way to get it done. Charlie has always pointed out what would have happened if the Constitutional Convention back there in Philadelphia had been held with every delegate running out immediately to tell the TV cameras how right he was and how wrong everybody else was. It doesn't accomplish much to dig in on positions and not be in a position to compromise, because it takes a lot of compromise to write something when you have two fundamentally different views on some important aspects of the tax code. But those are two good guys, and I don't think it's impossible at all that we have a new corporate tax code within a year.
What did you learn from The Wealth of Nations, and how did it shape your investment and business philosophy?
Well, it doesn't shape my investment philosophy, but I certainly learned economics from it. And my friend Bill Gates gave me an original copy of it. I was able to study it as Adam Smith wrote it in 1776. There's just, if you read Adam Smith and if you read Keynes, Ricardo, and if you also read that little book we've got out there called Where Are the Customer's Yachts? you will have a lot of wisdom. I forgot to mention, I was supposed to mention too, that we didn't want to put it on sale earlier because it would have given away the movie, but we do have Berkshire Bomber underwear out there, or sweatshirts, or whatever it may be. So Fruit of the Loom has those. And we have Fred Schwed's Where Are the Customer's Yachts book, which contains an incredible amount of wisdom in very few pages and very entertaining. But if you want to not only get a lot more wisdom but appear more erudite, you should read The Wealth of Nations also. Charlie?
Well, yeah, guys is really worn well. I mean, he is rightly recognized as one of the wisest people that ever came along. And of course, the lessons that he taught way back then were taught again when communism failed so terribly, and people like Singapore and Taiwan and China and so forth came up so fast. The productive power of the capitalist system is simply unbelievable. And he understood that fully and early, and he's done a lot of good.
I took an idea of his on the specialization of labor, and he talked about people making pins or something, but I applied that actually to philanthropy. I mean, the idea that you let other people do what they're best at and stick with what you're best at, I've carried from mowing my lawn to philanthropy, and it's a wonderful thing to just shove off everything and saying somebody else is better than that and than I am at that, and then work in the field that's most productive for you.
You didn't do your own bowel surgery either.
No. I'm not sure I have any reply to that.
According to people I've spoken to, Berkshire subsidiaries that were formerly publicly traded have run into trouble by, now this is on the margin, mind you, trying to maximize calendar year earnings and dividends to the parent as opposed to focusing on the long-term health of the business.
I don't think we've had any particular problem with public companies versus private companies that we bought. I mean, I think if you took the aggregate of the public companies we bought and matched them up against the private companies, I don't know which group I would rather own or which has delivered the greater returns.
I don't know where he gets the idea.
Yeah, I don't think
it's not apparent to us.
Yeah. Well, you've heard Charlie. And I can't think of it myself. And, if we tell them to think about 100 years, we mean think about 100 years. And I think they know we mean it. They certainly know we run Berkshire, in terms of our own decisions that way. So I think we set the right example, and I think we use the words to convey that belief as strongly as we can, and we try to reinforce we try to put it in the annual report. We try to talk about it in meetings like this. We believe in sort of hammering the same message out there over and over again. Now, we don't ignore yearly results at all. It's just we don't live by them. But I get figures every month on virtually every business, and I read them with great interest, and I'm thinking about them all the time. I don't think they're unimportant, but we don't live by them. And I think what really counts, is where we're going to be 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years from now. But I also, I wouldn't, if we're subpar in some area, I wouldn't accept the fact that we're working to maximize things in 10 years mean that we should be throwing away money or anything like that in the short run, or not paying attention to the business. But I'd have to say what Charlie has. I don't really agree with the premise.
You own companies both here in the US as well as in Germany. What differences in corporate culture and in performance do you see between German and US daughter companies?
Charlie?
What differences between what do we?
No, I know the question. Yeah, I'm looking to you for the answer, not the question.
Oh. Now they can hear so much better.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a hard time buying things in Europe. It's been quite rare. And I think the traditions and the family traditions are different in Europe than they are in the United States and in some other countries. And Germany, of course, has a long tradition of being very good at technology and capitalism. And that's been a godsend to Germany. And we've always admired the way the Germans have performed. The Germans actually work fewer hours than a lot of other people and produce a lot more. And, of course, Warren and I are pretty good at that. And so we admire the Germans, particularly the engineering side, but we've been thinking about owning good German companies for a long time, and we finally bought one.
Yeah, but I'll make a prediction. I will predict we buy at least one German company in the next 5 years. I think we are far more on the radar screen than we were just a few years ago in Germany. I think we now have a woman over there who brought through somebody else as well, but brought Louis to our attention. I think she is going to hear about more things because of her association with us on the transaction and the fact that we tried to get the word out as to her help with us. So I would really be surprised if we don't make at least one deal in Germany in the next 5 years, and I would look forward to it. I mean, we'll be very, very happy. We have to get a business we understand. I've had probably 4 or 5 letters in the last couple months ever since the Louis deal was announced. But there have been very small businesses in practically each case, but we'll get one. We're eager. We got the money, and we do fit the family situation occasionally, and prices may be a little more attractive there than in the United States, although I haven't seen anything yet that we bought. But I would say that there's a reasonable chance that the price of something we're offered over there might catch my attention more than U.S. prices currently.
I'm 78 and she's 74. We have a long-time accident-free driving record. Yet when we applied to GEICO with our stockholder discount, GEICO was unable to beat our rates for comparable coverage with other fine companies. Why?
Well, it's the reason that we probably can beat the rate maybe 40% of the time with people who contact us, and 60% of the time we can't. No company is going to be the lowest in all cases, and we have our own underwriting criteria that involves many variables, one of which is age, but wouldn't be a dominant one at that age. But we have many, many variables, and we make our calculations, and very good competitors like State Farm and Allstate, USAA, and so on, they have somewhat different underwriting weightings, and sometimes they come in below us. But I don't think any company of size will be the lowest more often than GEICO. We give out quotes on the telephone to many, many thousands of people every week. I get the figures every week, and I get the number of quotes, and I get the number of policies sold. And I can tell you the percentages are very substantial that we sell, and we're not selling them if we're charging them more than the people before them. So different people have different weightings for different variables, and the couple you referred to sound like they should get a very good rate from somebody, but they apparently got a better rate from somebody else than us, and that's going to happen perhaps 60% of the time, and 40% of the time we're going to get the business. And since we're only 11% of the whole market now, it means we've got a lot of policyholders yet to gather. It's an interesting question when you're looking at how to evaluate drivers. We know that 16-year-old boys are about as bad as they get. 16-year-old girls are a better class. Does that mean they're better drivers? Not necessarily. It may mean that they don't have the same tendency to show off. It may mean that they don't drive as many miles. It may mean a whole lot of things. So we ask a lot of questions, and other people ask different questions, and we will come up with different rates. But it's definitely worth 15 minutes to call GEICO. Charlie?
Well, I would say besides, when you get into the older people's group and you find you're not deteriorating as fast as most of your contemporaries, you may be paying an unfair price for the insurance, but it's a good trade-off.
Gary. Hadn't thought of it that way before.
The reinsurance market has changed dramatically. A lot of alternative capital coming into the business, making it much harder to make the assumption that there would be a big opportunity after the next big catastrophic event. What is it that you and Ajit are planning to change or do to take advantage of whatever opportunities might be there?
Well, wouldn't our competitors like to know? The reinsurance business is not as good as it was, and it's unlikely to be as good as it was. There's a lot of money that's come into reinsurance, not because they want to reinsure people, but because it's become either a fashionable asset class for people that are looking for so-called non-correlated investments and may not know what they're doing, but it's something you can sell people. You know, that's an attractive line to go to pension funds with. And then secondly, it's a beard for asset management. So if you go to Bermuda and start a reinsurance company, you can actually run a hedge fund, and you need a little business to make it look like you're doing something other than running a hedge fund and locating it offshore so you don't pay any tax. But that's the primary motivation. So when you get a whole lot of people that are bringing money in and they sort of need your facade of reinsurance to cover up what their real motivations are, you're likely to get less attractive prices in reinsurance. And that's been happening on a fairly large scale. And I would say that I would expect that reinsurance business in the next 10 years to not be as good as it has been. I'm talking about the whole industry, as it has been, in the last 30 or something like that. It's a business whose prospects have turned for the worse, and there's not much we can do about it. We do find things to do. There are certain things that only Berkshire can do. And I mentioned in the annual report that there have been 8 contracts written with premiums of $1 billion or more, and we've written all 8 of them. So there's a certain corner of the world that we've got a strong position in, and there's a few other things we will do, but it's not as good as it was. Charlie?
Well, I think generally speaking, of course, it's going to be harder, and of course this competition from promotional finance is getting more and more intense, and they're more optimistic. They're searching for a robust narrative. We're not searching for a robust narrative so we can sell something. We're playing the game for the long pull, and other people just pretend to be doing so.
Yeah, we've had the opportunity for a long period of time to go out and promote reinsurance type money, and really take advantage, of people on it, because we would have the best reputation in the field, and we could attract a ton of money, and we could get a big override on it. But it's not our game.
And we don't particularly admire the way it's being played.
How do you make lots of friends and get people to like you and work with you?
That's not a bad question. Very good question.
Well, I was pretty obnoxious when I was your age and asked a lot of impertinent questions. And not everybody liked me. And so the only way I could get the people to like me a little bit was to get very rich and very generous. That will work.
People will see all kinds of virtues in you if they think you'll write a check. Yeah, the truth is, both Charlie and I were on the obnoxious side early on, but you should get a little smarter about human behavior as you get older, and I turned out to have some pretty good teachers as I went along in terms of what worked. I mean, I have looked at other people during my lifetime and had these wonderful teachers. They weren't teachers in the standard definition, but they were people I admired, and I thought to myself, why do I admire these people? And if I want to be admired myself, why shouldn't I take on some of their qualities? So it's not a complicated proposition. If you look around you at the people you like in your school, write down 3 or 4 things they do that make you like them, and then look around at the 3 or 4 people that turn you off and write down those qualities and decide that you're going to be a person you yourself would like, that you take on the qualities of the person on the left. You're generous, you're friendly, you accept things with good humor, you don't claim credit for things you don't do, all of these things, and they're all possible to do. And if you like that in other people, people are going to like it in you. And if you find things that are kind of obnoxious, you're always late, and you're always claiming credit for more than you do, and you're kind of negative on everything, and you don't like those in other people, get rid of them in yourself, and you'll find out it works pretty well.
And it really works in marriage. If you can change yourself instead of trying to change your spouse, that's a good idea.
Charlie has said the most important thing in selecting a marriage partner is that you don't look for intelligence or humor or character. He says you look for someone with low expectations.
Comment on the lengthy dispute with NetJet's pilots who are picketing outside. What type of return on investment do you expect from the billions on order in aircraft for NetJets? And in a very pointed way, he writes, was buying NetJets a mistake?
No, I don't think buying NetJets was a mistake. We've had a few things where it looked like a mistake for quite a while, and some of them turned out to be a mistake. But NetJets is a very decent business. We have a good business. The pilots have a good job. It's not really the right way to look at it, I don't think, in terms of return on investment in the billions of dollars of orders we have, because we resell those planes to owners, and we do have a core fleet that represents an investment, but the investment is held in very large part by the owners themselves. I own, what do I own? 3/16 or something like that of one type of plane that my children use. I own 1/8 of another plane that I use, but that's my investment. It's not the NetJets investment. The labor relations at Berkshire, we've had hundreds of labor unions over the years. I mean, literally hundreds. In fact, we probably have hundreds at the present time. And we've only had, in 50 years, we've had 3 strikes that I can remember. I don't think there have been any others. There could have been some one-day walkout maybe, but we had a 4-day strike at Berkshire Hathaway textile operation. We had a 4-day or so strike at the Buffalo News 30 years ago. So we have no anti-union agenda whatsoever, and we think we have sensational pilots. I mean, I have flown NetJets. My family's flown NetJets now for 20 years, and we've had nothing but professional pilots and friendly pilots, and it's not, it's in human nature to have differences sometimes about what people get paid. Our pilots make an average of $145,000 a year. They have options, but one of the options, and the main option, is 7 days on and 7 days off. We pay for their time to get to where they're based. They can live any place in the country, and compared to our competitors at FlexJets or Flight Options or so on, or in charter, we pay well, but it's perfectly understandable that employers and employees have some differences from time to time, and we'll get it worked out, but that doesn't necessarily come in a day or a week or a month. And our volume is up in terms of flying. Our volume is up in terms of owners and in the United States. Europe's flat. But the United States is the bigger end of it. So it's a business I'm very glad we own. I'm proud we own it. It's a first-class operation. We give our pilots more training, I believe, than anybody else. And I'm flying on NetJets. My kids are all flying on NetJets. Our managers are, in many cases, are flying on it. So nobody cares more about safety. This is not a company where the CEO flies on his own jet and other people fly in other ways. So I get the same planes that the other people get and the same pilots. I mean, there's no special arrangement. So we've got this intense interest in safety, and we've got very professional pilots. And at the moment, we've got a difference of opinion about a contract, but that will get settled in my view. Charlie?
I have never in all the years had a NetJet pilot that didn't affect me as a wonderful fellow and a very skilled, able, and dutiful, reliable person. And I would say I can think of no NetJet pilot that has ever in any way indicated that he's dissatisfied with his life. And a lot of them say they just love it because of I'm not at all sure the union is fairly representing the pilots.
Okay. He said, fellows, actually, we have a lot of women pilots, too.
Looking at your acquisition of Duracell from Procter & Gamble, and would you have done this deal without tax considerations, and if so, at what price?
Well, both Procter & Gamble and Berkshire Hathaway had tax advantages in doing the deal this way. So they probably wouldn't have sold it at the price at which the deal took place, and we wouldn't have bought it at the price without the tax benefits that each enjoyed. And this is something we had to have held our stock for over 5 years in Procter & Gamble. It's something that's been in the code a long time that we have had nothing to do with it being in the code, but it's part of the code. And it's somewhat similar to the real estate exchange arrangement where you can exchange real estate and defer any tax. We don't get a new tax basis on the Duracell. We keep the old lower tax base. Just like on, what do they call it? Is it Section 1231 or real estate exchanges? So it's analogous to that. And the answer is that there wouldn't have been a transaction from Procter & Gamble standpoint, and there wouldn't have been a transaction probably from Berkshire standpoint if it hadn't been for the fact that we could do an exchange arrangement. As to the declining business part, the battery business will be a declining business, but it'll be around for a very, very, very long time on a worldwide basis. And Duracell has a very strong position. It's a very good business, and like you say, I was familiar with it when I was on the Gillette board. But it will have unit declines over a period of time. But I think we'll do fine with the Duracell investment. I'm looking forward to getting the deal complete, which probably won't take place until the fourth quarter, because we have to get it detached from a lot of other things like the IT and distribution centers and everything else that it's involved in with P&G. But P&G has been great to work with. They're making the transition. They couldn't be better to work with during that period, and I'll be very happy when we own it.
Can you talk about your views on philanthropy and how to balance leaving an inheritance to your family versus assets to charity?
Depends very much on the individual situation. And actually, I promised to give over 99% in my case. But that still leaves plenty left over. As you know, the estate tax exemption has been moved up substantially here in the last couple of years. So I might have a very different feeling if I'd had a child that had worked actively, helped me build a business and all of that sort of thing, and it was a small business, and I wanted to give it to them. But that can be really done without any estate tax these days, particularly if a little planning is used ahead of time. It's a very individual thing. As Charlie, when you get to the figuring out what you do with your money, the options get very fairly limited. And as Charlie said the other day, he said where he's going, it won't do him much good anyway. There's no Forbes 400, in the graveyard. And so the question is, where does it do the most good? And I think it does limited amounts do some real good for my children. So I'll be sure that they have that, or they already have it to a degree. And on the other hand, when I look at a bunch of stock certificates in a safe deposit box that were put there 50 years ago or so, they have absolutely no utility to me. Zero. They can't do anything for me in life. I mean, they can't let me consume 7,000 calories a day instead of 3,000. They can't. There's nothing they can do. I've got everything in the world I want. I've had it for decades. If I wanted something additionally, I go buy it. So here these things are that have no utility to me, and they have enormous utility to some people in other parts of the world. I mean, they can save lives, they can provide vaccines, they can provide education. There are all kinds of utility. So why in the world should they sit there, for me or for, some fourth generation down of great-grandchildren or something, when they can do a lot of good now? So that's my own philosophy on it. But I think everybody has to develop their own feelings about it and should follow where they go. I do think they might ask themselves, where will it do the most good? And it can be pretty dramatic between what it can do for millions of people that don't really have remotely the same shot at having a decent life that I've had, or what it can do for me. I mean, if I could have 10 houses, but I could buy a hotel to live in. What would I be happier? It'd be crazy. Charlie and I have both like fairly simple lives, but the one thing we do know is we know what we like and what we don't like, and we don't judge it by what other people like. So I don't have too much advice for anybody, but I would say start thinking about it. When I call people on the Giving Pledge, some of them, I'll get some 70-year-old and he says, I don't want to think about it yet. And I always tell them, well, are you going to make a better decision when you're 95 with some blonde on your lap, or something? That actually was tried a few years ago, as you may know. Charlie?
No, but it does occur to me that fellow who was complaining about the tax system should remember that when they've recently changed the estate tax rules, so you can leave $5 million to your kids and so forth. I think that's a very constructive change in the laws. So I don't think we should assume that our politicians are always going to be totally crazy. That was a very desirable change, I think.
Would it make sense, and I'm going to add my own edit here to say, and would it be legally permissible for Berkshire to distribute at some time in the future any or some of the long-term equity investments, for example, Coca-Cola or American Express, to the shareholders in a tax-efficient way, as Yahoo is planning to do with the Alibaba stake, for example?
I don't think Yahoo solved it, actually. Charlie, you follow that too.
I don't think that we can do that with American Express and so forth. So it's a bad example. We've got no way of doing that.
No, there used to be a way to do that many years ago, and it was done. I don't mean by us, but I saw other examples of it. But under the code, there's no way to use appreciated securities to redeem your own shares. You can do it for something like acquiring, where you're exchanging it for like asset type thing on the Duracell arrangement. But there's no way to distribute it to shareholders without paying the full capital gains tax. And
you can have spin-offs of whole businesses to shareholders if you've held them a long time. But that's about the only thing you can do.
Yeah, but even there, I mean, what Yahoo has done is not got rid of the tax.
I don't know anything about Yahoo.
Yeah, no, they or what they're planning to do. It may give them some other option if Alibaba wants to eventually redeem it themselves. I mean, there could be something they can work out a deal with Alibaba. I do not see how that they have gotten rid of the tax unless they do a subsequent transaction of some sort with Alibaba. But maybe they have different tax advice than I've seen. But I know all kinds of cases where where corporations have large unrealized gains in marketable securities, and I have not seen in recent years, although I did see it early in my career when the law was different, but I've not seen in recent years any way that people have gotten that money into the hands of the shareholders without paying a tax at the corporate level. Charlie,
No, that's what we say.
Could something more secular be going on where household formation rates relative to the population could continue to be lower than historical rates? Could the U.S. become more like Europe, where many adult children live with their parents or in-laws for quite some time? Or do you think still that the subdued rate of household formation is mostly a cyclical phenomenon and that the rate will eventually revert to the historical mean, boosting single-family home starts and earnings for this group of companies?
I don't know the answer, obviously, but I think the latter is more likely. And I may be wrong. When's the last set of figures you've looked at in that connection? I've heard that it's turned up a fair amount in the last 6 months, but have you seen anything on that, Johnny? Or
Nothing really recently, no.
Yeah, I should know the figures, but I don't for the last 6 months or 9 months. But my impression is that they had turned up somewhat. I did my best on selling that ring in the movie to that guy, and they're going to form a household here in another month or two, to which I've been invited. But the truth is, I don't know. What's going to happen on household formation. I would expect, but I expected it earlier than this. I would expect it to turn up. It always turns down in a recession, and you can argue that we're not all the way back from the recession yet. But, your guess would be as good as mine, Charlie.
Well, I feel exactly the same way, but I think I speak for a lot of members of the audience when I say I have some grandchildren that I wish would marry somebody suitable promptly.
What's the reason for your interest, Charlie?
I don't think it's healthy for these people to hang around looking for pie in the sky or whatever the hell they're doing.
Are they in attendance today?
I don't know some of them, maybe. I don't want to name names.
No. I think you've already been pointed enough. Okay.
How can corporations be encouraged to make an even greater impact in the lives of those who are not shareholders?
Yeah, I agree entirely with your motivation about increasing philanthropy. I am much more of a believer, however, in individual philanthropy than corporate philanthropy. I really feel that I've got everything I need, but I do also feel that I'm working for the shareholders, and they should determine their own philanthropic activities. That it's their money. Now, we participate in things. I mean, I encourage all our companies to continue the philanthropic behavior that they have before we've acquired them, and we want them to participate in their communities and to help the entities that help their employees and their customers. But I don't really think it's my business ever to write a check to my alma mater or whatever it may be, and do it on company funds. I don't feel it's my money. I really look at this as a partnership. We've always looked at it as a partnership, and we had a system some years back where all the shareholders could designate contributions, and I felt that was quite a good system. And then we had to give it up for reasons that I hated to give it up, but we had to do it. The interesting thing about philanthropy, I mean, I have never given a penny to any organization that has cost me anything in my life. I mean, I've never given up a movie. I've never given up a trip. I've never given up a vacation. I've never given up a present to my kids. People give money this Sunday, that really actually changes their lifestyle in a small way. And that hasn't happened with me. Everything I've given has been ungodly surplus, and I'm glad I can do it. But it's people like your son, that I really admire. But, Charlie?
Well, my taste for giving away somebody else's money is also quite restrained.
I was on the board one time of an organization that needed to raise a fair amount of money, and it wasn't church affiliated or anything like that. And so they asked me to call on 4 or 5 corporate chieftains, and they said, be sure not to ask them to give anything personally. Just ask them to give the corporate money. And I said, I'm not going to do it. Basically, if they won't put up their own money on it, why should they write checks on behalf of all their shareholders? So I've got real reservations about corporate philanthropy for the personal reasons to some extent of the CEO or the directors.
Do Charlie and you think that the euro currency has had a positive or negative effect overall on the Eurozone economy? And do you think it would be a good decision for France to quit the euro currency?
Well, that's too easy for me to answer, so I'll give it to Charlie.
I haven't got the faintest idea. I think the euro had a noble motivation and had promise of doing a lot of good, and it undoubtedly has done a lot of good. But it's a flawed system in some ways to put countries that are so different together, and it's straining at the moment. The big strains aren't in France. The big strains are in, Greece and Portugal and so on. And I do think they created something that was probably unwise. They got countries in there that shouldn't have been there. You can't form a business partnership with your shiftless, drunken brother-in-law. You have to make your partnerships with somebody else. And I think they lowered their standards a little, and it's caused strains.
I think everything here is off the record, understand. I think it's a good idea that needs a lot of work still. And I think it has been a good thing net to this point, but it is flawed, and the flaws are appearing, but that doesn't mean it can't be corrected. I mean, we wrote a constitution in 1789 that still took a few amendments, and some of them didn't happen for a long time in respect to some very important factors. So I don't think that the fact that it wasn't perfectly designed initially should condemn it to being abandoned. But I think that if there are flaws, you have to face up to them. And I think that maybe the events that are happening currently will cause that. Presumably, we could have had a common currency with Canada and probably have made it work. I mean, if we decided
we could have made it work.
Yeah, we could have had a North American currency with Canada, and we'd have worked it out, and it might have even been useful. But we couldn't have had a hemisphere-wide currency with Venezuela in it or something.
With Argentina.
Yeah, and so. He loves to name names. Praised by name, criticized by category. And I actually think it's probably desirable to have a euro currency properly designed and enforced so that that the rules really apply. There were rules originally on the euro which got broken very early on by not the Greeks but by the Germans and the French, as I remember. So
the investment bankers let them they helped them prepare phony financial statements.
Yeah,
I mean, it was investment banker aided fraud.
No.
Not exactly novel.
So returning to our main point, I think the euro can and probably should survive, and I think it's going to take some real changes and maybe some examples to enable it to do so. I hope it really, it's going to go in the direction of more cohesion or less, and very soon probably, and I think if it can figure out a way to do it with more cohesion, overall it will be a good thing for Europe. But it's certainly, it is in its present form, it's not going to work. Charlie? I don't know why I'm giving you another shot, but
I think I've offended enough people.
Right. There's 2 or 3 in the balcony.
With the Van Tuyl acquisition, or now Berkshire Hathaway Automotive, there may be some natural synergies with Geico?
I don't think so. You always have these things that the investment banker will tell you will produce synergy and all that. Most times that doesn't work. And historically, selling auto insurance through dealerships hasn't been particularly effective. And if we were to do that, we would probably have to compensate people who did the insurance work or made the insurance sales out of Van Tuyl. That would add to costs. Geico is a low-cost model, and it's a wonderful low-cost model. And Tony Nicely has done an incredible job of keeping those costs down, and you can see it in our expense ratios. We spend a lot of money on advertising, but its success depends on delivering first-class insurance at a better price than other people can get, and the more people we put in distribution system or anything. So I would doubt very much that we do anything along that line. I think that those 2 companies will do better if run as 2 independent businesses than if we try to push through something. Charlie and I have seen a lot of things on paper that involve that sort of a proposition, and very, very few succeed. Charlie?
Well, I agree. It's a very dumb idea, and we're not going to do it.
What value in silver at these prices do you see, and do you still follow the silver market?
I really don't follow it much anymore. At one time, we owned over 100 million ounces of silver, and I knew a fair amount about the supply and demand for it and the prospective supply and demand, but I really don't. I haven't paid much attention to it for a long, long time.
Well, it's a very good thing, too. We didn't do that well.
Yeah. We made a little money.
Yes.
Photography changed it. The interesting thing about silver is that there are some pure silver mines, but overwhelmingly, silver is produced as a byproduct, in terms of copper mining, and so it doesn't respond as much to its own supply and demand characteristics. That's still a factor, as it does in terms of the supply and demand characteristics of the things of which it's a byproduct, like copper. So it's a very small market too, but we came out better than the Hunt brothers, but other than that, we don't think about silver anymore.
We hope that Charlie and Warren will both be around forever, but unfortunately there will be a time when they're no longer here to manage the store.
I reject such defeatism.
If Warren is giving away his shares to charity over a 10-year period through his estate plan and activists become increasingly more powerful, how will Berkshire defend itself from activists in the near and far future?
Well, if it's run right, there won't be a premium in breaking it up. It may look like it. People will say there's subsidiary A that would sell at 20 times earnings and the whole place is selling at 15. But the whole place won't sell at 15 if you spin off the one at 20. I laid out in the annual report, there are a lot of benefits to Berkshire in terms of having the companies in the same corporate tax return. So I think it's unlikely that on any long-term basis or an intermediate-term basis that the value of the parts will be greater than the best defense against activism is performance. But lately, there's been so much money pouring into activist funds because it's been easy to raise money for that. I mean, it's been a successful way of handling money for the last few years, and institutional money then starts flowing into it, and the consultants recommend it and all of that sort of thing. And so I would say that much of what I see as activism now, people are really reaching in terms of what they're of the kind of companies that they're talking about and the claims of what they can do and that sort of thing. I think the biggest, if you're talking about my shares getting dispensed over 10 years after my estate settled and the voting power they have, and I think by the time that gets to be a reality, I think the market value of Berkshire is likely to be so great that even if all the activists gathered together, they wouldn't be able to do very much about it. Berkshire is likely to really be a very, very large organization 10 or 20 years
from now. Besides, the Buffett super voting power is going to last a long time.
It lasts a long time, yeah. I've got these friends that call me in other companies, and they've got an activist, and they're worried about it. I just tell them to send them over to Berkshire. We'll welcome them. We'd love to have them buy our stock because they're not going to get any place. And that's going to be the situation for a long, long time. We should be a place where people can dump their activists. Charlie?
Well, the thing that I find interesting is in the old days when most stocks sold for way less than they were worth in terms of intrinsic value, it was very rare to find an American corporation buying the stock in.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in many cases, the activists are urging corporations to buy the stock